The morning Lupita Harris discovered her worth wasn't measured in tears, but in the trembling hands of those who'd underestimated her. Snow fell on the Samberg estate like ashes from a burning empire. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Connecticut mansion, her reflection a study in composure. The silk emerald dress she wore, chosen specifically for this moment, caught the light from the 12-foot Christmas tree behind her. Every detail of this morning had been orchestrated, from the Tiffany earrings Alan had given her on their first anniversary to the subtle application of the perfume his mother Eleanor claimed was too exotic for their circles. "Darling, everyone's waiting in the drawing room." Alan Samberg's voice carried that particular tone of condescension he'd perfected over their 5 years of marriage. He stood in the doorway, his Italian suit impeccable, his smile holding all the warmth of the December frost outside. Lupita turned slowly, her movements deliberate. Of course they are. The drawing room held the entire Samberg dynasty. Eleanor Whitmore Samberg sat in her throne-like wingback chair, her silver hair coiffed to perfection, her judgment already rendered in the slight curl of her lips. Harrison Samberg stood by the fireplace, checking his Patek Philippe watch with theatrical impatience. Genevieve lounged on the settee, her phone ready to document whatever humiliation was about to unfold. "Lupita?" Eleanor's voice cut through the room like crystal breaking. "How appropriate that you finally joined us. Though I suppose punctuality was never stressed in your background. 5 years ago, such words would have stung. 5 years ago, Lupita had been the brilliant young attorney from Thibodaux, Louisiana, who'd caught Alan's eye at a charity gala. She'd given up her position at Thurgood Brennan and Associates, given up her cases defending those who couldn't defend themselves, given up everything to become Mrs. Alan Samberg. She'd endured their subtle cruelties, their constant reminders that she was a guest in their world, not a member. "My apologies, Eleanor," Lupita said, taking her place on the sofa across from them. "I was selecting the perfect gift for this occasion." Alan cleared his throat, producing an envelope from his jacket with the flourish of a magician revealing his grand trick. "Lupita, we need to discuss our future. Or rather, the lack thereof." He placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. Through the expensive paper, she could see the letterhead of Cromwell, Ashmont and Associates, the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys. 5 years, Alan continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. 5 years we've tried to make this work, but let's be honest, we come from different worlds. This was never going to last. Genevieve raised her phone slightly, ready to capture the moment Lupita broke. Harrison shifted his weight, uncomfortable but complicit. Eleanor's smile widened imperceptibly. Lupita reached for the envelope, her fingers steady as she opened it. She read through the terms: abandonment of all claims to Samberg assets, a modest settlement that would barely cover a studio apartment in Queens, and of course, no mention of the company she'd helped him build. "You were always too ambitious for your own good," Eleanor added, unable to resist twisting the knife. "A girl from the bayou playing dress-up in Dior. Did you really think you belonged here?" Lupita set the papers down gently, then rose with the grace she'd learned not from their etiquette coaches, but from her grandmother, Evangeline Harris, who'd raised 9 children with dignity, despite Jim Crow's attempts to strip it away. "Before you escort me out," Lupita said, walking to the Christmas tree, "I have a gift for you." She retrieved a small box wrapped in silver paper, adorned with a single white ribbon. The weight of it in her hands felt like justice itself. She placed it before Alan with the same ceremonial precision he'd used with the divorce papers. "Open it," she said simply. Alan's fingers worked at the ribbon with sudden uncertainty. Inside the box, nestled in white tissue, lay 2 envelopes. His hand hesitated before selecting the first one. As he read, the color drained from his face like wine from an overturned glass. This can't be legal." Every signature authenticated, every transfer documented, Lupita said. Sterling Blackwood took possession of Samberg Development Group at midnight. The sale was finalized 3 months ago. That's impossible. Harrison stepped forward. The company is in Alan's name. Actually, Lupita interrupted, if you check the incorporation documents from 3 years ago, when Alan needed my expertise to navigate that federal investigation, you'll find the holding company is in my name, a detail your son insisted upon for tax purposes. He was so confident I'd never understand the implications. Eleanor rose from her chair, her composure cracking. You can't do this. That company is worth $800 million at current valuation. Lupita finished, though Sterling paid a premium for the satisfaction of acquiring his rival's empire. Alan's hands shook as he reached for the second envelope. The ultrasound image fell onto the table, followed by the medical report from Dr. Adaize Okonkwo, the best obstetrician in the state. 12 weeks, Lupita said softly. The heir you've been pressuring me to produce for 5 years. The grandchild Eleanor demanded as proof I could contribute something worthwhile to the Samberg legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. Genevieve's phone lay forgotten in her lap. Harrison gripped the mantelpiece as if it might steady his world. Eleanor sank back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing without sound. You planned this, Alan whispered, the papers crumpling in his grip. You knew about Celeste, about everything. Lupita smiled then, not with cruelty, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd played a long game and won. 6 months ago, when you took her to the Vineyard House, our anniversary weekend, I knew. When Eleanor told the ladies at the Providence Club that I was fertile enough despite my origins, I knew. When Harrison suggested I should be grateful for the privilege of bearing the Samberg name, I knew. She walked to the door, then turned for one last look at the family who'd tried to break her. Your divorce papers are accepted. My attorneys at Carrington, Dubois and Meridian will handle the details. As for the children actually, it's twins. They'll know their worth from birth. They'll never beg for crumbs at anyone's table. Lupita, wait. Alan started forward, but she raised her hand. Merry Christmas, she said. May you finally understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was yours by right. As she walked through the marble foyer for the last time, her heels clicking against the stone like a countdown to their ruin, Lupita heard Eleanor's voice crack. Get Sterling on the phone. There must be something. But Lupita knew there was nothing. Every move had been calculated, every document bulletproof. The girl from Thibodeau had played by their rules and won with a hand they never saw coming. Outside, her driver, not theirs anymore, waited with the Bentley she'd purchased in her own name last month. As they pulled away from the estate, snow still falling like a benediction, Lupita placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, Your story begins with your mother's victory. The Samberg dynasty had bet she would cry. Instead, she'd given them something to weep about for generations. Chapter 2. The Hidden Heir. The call came at midnight, 3 days after Christmas, when the truth had finally settled into Alan Samberg's bones, like winter cold that no fire could warm. Lupita stood on the terrace of her new penthouse, 40 floors above Central Park, purchased under her maiden name 6 months ago, watching the city lights blur through the falling snow. The phone rang with the persistence of desperation. She let it ring 7 times before answering. You knew about the twins from the beginning. Alan's voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual polish. You knew, and you let me throw it all away. I knew many things, Lupita replied, her voice carrying the warmth she'd never waste on him again. I knew about your Tuesday meetings with Celeste at the Carlisle. I knew about the Zurich account you thought was hidden. I knew your mother spent $50,000 trying to investigate my background, hoping to find something that would justify her hatred. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see her reflection, not the diminished woman they'd tried to create, but the phoenix that had risen from their ashes. The pregnancy suited her, adding a glow that no amount of Eleanor's expensive facial treatments had ever achieved. "My family wants to meet," Alan said, the words dragging from him like confession from a guilty man. "My mother, she hasn't slept since Christmas. The board is threatening to remove my father as chairman since the company sale went public." Lupita moved inside, settling into the custom Italian leather chair she'd chosen for its perfect support. The penthouse was everything the Samberg estate wasn't: warm, vibrant, filled with art from black artists whose work Eleanor had called too political for their walls. "Your mother," Lupita said slowly, savoring each word, "once told me I should be grateful you chose me, despite my obvious deficiencies. She suggested I take hormone treatments to ensure any children would have good hair. She hired a speech coach to eliminate what she called my unfortunate Louisiana inflections." "She's changed." Lupita's laugh was rich, genuine. "Has she? Or has she simply discovered that her grandchildren, the only Samberg heirs, will be raised by the woman she spent 5 years trying to erase?" The memory of her first family dinner with the Sambergs remained vivid. She'd worn her best dress, carefully chosen to be conservative, yet elegant. Eleanor had looked her over like livestock at auction, noting every perceived flaw. The conversation had been a minefield of coded insults and careful exclusions. They'd spoken about European vacations she'd never taken, boarding schools she'd never attended, people she'd never know. "Your sister posted photos of me on her private Instagram," Lupita continued. "She called me Alan's charity case and made bets with her friends about how long I'd last. Your father suggested I stop practicing law because it was unseemly for a Samberg wife to work. Every day for 5 years, your family made it clear I was temporary." She heard Alan's breathing, ragged and desperate. Behind him she could make out Eleanor's voice, sharp and demanding. "Ask her about the children. Ask her what she wants." "What I wanted," Lupita said, rising to pour herself a glass of sparkling pear juice from the baccarat decanter, "was a family. What I wanted was to use my law degree to help your company navigate its legal challenges. What I wanted was to raise children who knew both sides of their heritage. But you all made it clear that what I wanted was irrelevant." The irony wasn't lost on her. The Sambergs, who'd spent generations building their empire on the backs of others' labor, now found themselves begging for scraps from someone they'd considered beneath them. The company Alan's great-grandfather had founded using questionable contracts and exploited workers was now in the hands of Sterling Blackwood, a black man who'd built his fortune ethically and brilliantly. "The twins," Alan said, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you know what they are? Boys? Girls?" "One of each," Lupita replied. "Perfect in every way. They'll have my last name, of course, Harris. They'll know their history, all of it. The Louisiana roots your mother found so distasteful. The ancestors who survived what yours inflicted. The strength that comes from struggle, not inheritance." She moved to her home office, where the walls displayed her achievements, her Howard Law degree, her civil rights commendations, the photos from her time defending those who couldn't afford justice. All the things she'd packed away when she'd married Alan, thinking love required sacrifice. "I loved you," Alan said suddenly. "Whatever you think, I did love you." "You loved the idea of me," Lupita corrected. "The beautiful black wife who made you seem progressive. The brilliant attorney who could fix your problems. The fertile woman who could give you heirs. But you never loved me enough to defend me when your mother called me urban at the country club. You never loved me enough to leave the bed you shared with Celeste to attend my father's funeral." Benjamin Harris had died alone in a Louisiana hospital, while Alan was in the Hamptons with his mistress. Lupita had held her father's hand as he passed, promising him she wouldn't let them break her. That was the moment she'd begun planning. "Sterling Blackwood wants to meet with my father," Alan said, changing tactics. "He's demanding Harrison step down from all his board positions. He says you have documents proving your father's insider trading, his discriminatory hiring practices, the bribes to city officials? Lupita smiled. Yes, I have those. Your family was so confident in my ignorance, you left everything accessible, every password saved, every document unguarded. You discussed crimes at dinner while I sat silent, assuming I didn't understand. The sound of glass breaking came through the phone, Harrison's rage finally finding physical expression. She heard Eleanor's voice rise. This is extortion. We'll sue her for everything. On what grounds? Lupita asked, knowing they could hear her. Everything I did was legal. Every transfer properly documented, every sale legitimate. Your prenuptial agreement, the one designed to leave me with nothing, actually protected my separate assets. The joke, as they say, is on you. She pulled up the ultrasound image on her tablet, studying the two tiny hearts beating in perfect rhythm. These children would never know the crushing weight of conditional love. They would never sit at a table where their very existence was tolerated rather than celebrated. There must be something you want, Alan said desperately. Some arrangement we can make. Visitation rights, perhaps. Shared custody. My mother is prepared to apologize. Your mother is prepared to lie, Lupita interrupted, just as she lied when she smiled at our wedding while telling her friends she gave us 2 years maximum. Just as she lied when she said she'd love any grandchildren we had while secretly praying they'd inherit more Samberg than Harris features. She opened another document on her computer. The trust fund she'd established for the twins, funded by the company sale. They would want for nothing, but more importantly, they would owe nothing to anyone. Genevieve needs this, Alan tried again. She's being shunned by society, the embarrassment of what's happened. People are laughing at her. She's lost her position at the Met Gala committee. The same position she used to ensure I was never invited despite my donations, Lupita asked. How unfortunate for her. The penthouse's smart system announced a visitor, her attorney, Thaddeus Carrington, arriving for their evening meeting. Unlike the Samberg family lawyer who'd treated her like furniture during the prenuptial negotiations, Thaddeus respected her intellect and had helped craft her perfect revenge. I have to go, Lupita said. My actual family is arriving tomorrow. My mother, my aunts, my cousins, the people your family banned from our wedding reception because they might misunderstand the tone of the event. Lupita, please, the children will be born in July, she said, her tone final. You'll receive notification through proper legal channels. Any attempts to circumvent the custody agreement will result in the release of certain recordings from your family dinners. I believe Eleanor's thoughts on breeding and racial purity would make fascinating headlines. You recorded us? Every moment, Lupita confirmed. Every slur disguised as concern, every insult wrapped in silk. Every time you sat silent while they diminished me. Your children will never hear those recordings, but they'll exist as insurance against your family's interference. She paused, looking at a photo on her desk, herself as a child with her father, both beaming with joy at a church picnic in Louisiana. Benjamin Harris had been a janitor, but he'd carried himself with more dignity than Harrison Samberg ever possessed with all his millions. Do you want to know the real tragedy, Alan? Lupita asked softly. If your family had accepted me, truly accepted me, I would have helped you build an empire that mattered. I would have used my legal expertise to make your business bulletproof legally and ethically. These twins would have united two worlds, creating something beautiful from both heritages. But your family's hatred was stronger than their greed, their prejudice deeper than their desire for legacy. We were fools, Alan whispered, and for the first time he sounded like he might actually understand. No, Lupita corrected. You were exactly who you were raised to be. The difference is, now there are consequences. As she ended the call, Lupita felt the twins move, a flutter of life that reminded her why she'd endured so much. These children would be born free, truly free, from the golden chains the Sambergs had tried to wrap around her. Tomorrow, Evangeline Harris would arrive from Louisiana, bringing the warmth and wisdom the Samberg estate had never possessed. They would set up the nursery together, filling it with colors and culture, love and laughter. Her mother would hang the quilt made by Lupita's great-grandmother, a woman born into slavery who'd lived to see her great-grandchildren graduate from college. That quilt would mean more than all the designer nursery furniture the Sambergs could have bought. The hidden heirs would remain hidden no more, but they would never be weapons in the Sambergs' war for relevance. They would simply be children, loved and protected, raised by a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory comes from walking away with your dignity intact and their empire in ruins. Outside, New York glittered with promise. Somewhere in that maze of lights, the Sambergs were discovering that their money couldn't buy what they'd lost, their name couldn't command what they'd destroyed, and their legacy would be nothing but a cautionary tale about the price of prejudice. The twins moved again, stronger this time, as if declaring their own independence. Lupita placed both hands on her belly, feeling their strength, their persistence, their refusal to be denied. "You are already loved," she whispered to them. "You are already powerful. You are already everything they feared you would be, and that, my precious ones, is why we've already won." Chapter 3. The Ironclad Preparation. 6 months before Christmas, when the Louisiana heat still clung to her skin from her father's funeral, Lupita Harris sat in a Manhattan law library at 3 in the morning, building her war in silence. The funeral program lay beside her laptop. Benjamin Harris, beloved father, community pillar, the man who'd taught her that dignity wasn't something anyone could take unless you handed it to them. Alan hadn't come. He'd sent flowers with a card his secretary had signed, while he spent the weekend in the Hamptons with Celeste Beaumont, not knowing that the hotel's security cameras had captured their every entrance and exit. That was the night Lupita stopped being Mrs. Samberg and remembered she was Lupita Evangeline Harris, summa cum laude from Howard Law, the woman who'd won Thornwood versus State of New York at 27, the attorney who'd made powerful men tremble in courtrooms. Working late again? Sterling Blackwood's voice had broken through her concentration. She'd looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his presence filling the space with the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Sterling. She'd been surprised, but not alarmed. They'd met at legal conferences before her marriage, when she was still someone instead of someone's wife. "What brings you to the law library at this hour?" "The same thing that brings you, I imagine," he'd said, settling into the chair across from her with elegant precision. "Planning something that requires absolute discretion." She'd studied him. The man Alan feared most, the competitor who'd built an empire without inherited wealth or connections, the businessman who'd never forgotten where he came from. Sterling Blackwood had started with nothing but brilliance and determination, and now he owned half of Manhattan's most valuable commercial real estate. "My condolences about your father," he'd said, and unlike the empty platitudes she'd received from the Samberg circle, his sympathy carried weight. "Benjamin Harris was a good man. I remember when he came to my office, proud as could be, showing everyone your law school graduation photos." Tears she hadn't allowed herself at the funeral threatened to surface. "You knew my father?" "He did maintenance in my building for 10 years, Sterling had replied. "Never missed a day, always talked about his brilliant daughter who was going to change the world. He was heartbroken when you stopped practicing." The weight of that truth had settled on her shoulders. She'd given up everything for a man who couldn't even attend her father's funeral. "What are you researching?" Sterling had asked, glancing at her screen. She'd hesitated, then decided on honesty. Corporate asset transfer law. Specifically, how to legally transfer ownership of a company when you're the silent owner on paper. Sterling's eyes had sharpened with interest. "Alan doesn't know you own Samberg Development Group." It wasn't a question. She'd nodded slowly. 3 years ago, during the federal investigation into their labor practices, Alan needed someone with a clean record to hold the company assets. He was so confident I'd never understand what I was signing. But you did. "I wrote my thesis on corporate ownership structures," she'd said with grim satisfaction. "I knew exactly what those papers meant. I've been the legal owner for 3 years while Alan assumed it was just a formality." Sterling had leaned back, a smile playing at his lips that would have terrified anyone who knew what it meant. "And now you want to sell?" "To the right buyer," she'd confirmed. "Someone who understands what it means to take everything from those who thought you were nothing." That night they'd begun planning. Sterling had brought in his team of lawyers, all brilliant, all discreet, all people who'd been underestimated by men like the Sambergs. Together, they'd crafted a sale that was completely legal and utterly devastating. "We'll need documentation of everything," Sterling's lead attorney, a woman named Imani Okafor, had said during their second meeting. "Every insult, every slight, every moment they revealed their true nature." Lupita had pulled out her phone, showing them the app she'd installed. "I've been recording for 2 months, every dinner, every gathering, every private moment when they thought I wasn't listening." The recordings were damning. Eleanor discussing her hope that any grandchildren would take after their father's side more. Harrison explaining to his golf buddies that Lupita was articulate for her background. Genevieve laughing with her friends about how she'd convinced the charity board that Lupita wouldn't be a good fit for their committee. But the most damaging recording was Alan himself, drunk at his bachelor party recording that Genevieve had shared, explaining how marrying Lupita was good optics for the company's diversity issues. "This is gold," Imani had said, "but we need more than just personal grievances. We need financial leverage." That's when Lupita had revealed her second weapon. "I have access to everything, every account, every transaction, every deal they've ever made. They conduct business in front of me like I'm furniture." Over the following weeks, she'd documented everything. Harrison's insider trading, conducted through offshore accounts he accessed from his home computer. Eleanor's embezzlement from the charity she chaired, hidden in expenditures for administrative costs. Genevieve's tax evasion, routing her trust fund through shell companies to avoid payment. "They're criminals," Sterling had said simply when presented with the evidence. "Wealthy, protected criminals, but criminals nonetheless." "Which is why this needs to be perfect," Lupita had replied. "One mistake, and they'll use their connections to destroy me." She'd spent hours in that library, crafting documents that were works of legal art. The sale agreement with Sterling included clauses that prevented any reversal, no matter what the Sambergs tried. The custody arrangements she'd filed secretly were ironclad, based on Alan's documented abandonment and the family's recorded hostility. The most beautiful piece was the prenuptial agreement itself. The Sambergs' lawyer had been so focused on protecting Alan's visible assets that they'd ignored the clause about separate property acquired during marriage. Every purchase Lupita had made, every investment in her own name, was protected. "You've thought of everything," Sterling had said one night, reviewing the final documents. "Not everything," she'd replied. "I didn't think about what happens after, when they realize what I've done." "That's when you'll need allies," he'd said. "The kind of people who understand that money isn't power. Knowledge and preparation are power." He'd introduced her to a network she'd never known existed. Successful black professionals who'd been shut out of the Samberg circle. Latino executives who'd been passed over for promotions at Harrison's firms. Asian investors who'd been excluded from the old boys club. All of them eager to see the Samberg empire fall. "We've been waiting for someone like you," a tech entrepreneur named Kenji Yamamoto had told her, someone with inside access and the courage to use it. They'd helped her set up her new life, the penthouse purchased through a trust that couldn't be traced, the medical care from doctors who wouldn't report to the Sandbergs, the security team that would protect her when everything came to light. But the masterstroke had been the timing. She'd discovered her pregnancy the day after her father's funeral. Twins, the ultimate irony. The heirs the Sandbergs had been pressuring her to produce for years, arriving just as she was leaving. "You could have left quietly," Imani had said one day, "taken a settlement and disappeared. Why do this?" Lupita had thought of her father, dying while she sat at Eleanor's garden party, pretending to care about flower arrangements. She'd thought of every young woman who'd been told she should be grateful for crumbs from tables she'd helped build. "Because they need to know how it feels," she'd said, "to have everything taken by someone you never considered a threat." The preparation had been meticulous. Every document notarized, every recording backed up in multiple locations, every contingency planned for. She'd even arranged for the Christmas morning confrontation, knowing the family would all be together, their arrogance at its peak. "You're going to war," Sterling had observed the night before Christmas Eve. "No," Lupita had corrected. "The war is over. They just don't know they've already lost." Now, sitting in her penthouse office, reviewing the messages from Alan's lawyers, trying to find any weakness in her plan, Lupita smiled. They would find nothing because there was nothing to find. 6 months of preparation had built a fortress they couldn't breach. The twins moved within her, and she placed her hand on her stomach. "Your mother is many things," she whispered to them, "but she is never unprepared." The phone rang. Another lawyer, another desperate attempt to undo what couldn't be undone. She let it go to voicemail. The time for conversation was over. Now was the time to watch an empire fall, one perfectly legal document at a time. Chapter 4. The Family's First Plea. Eleanor Whitmore Sandberg had never begged for anything in her 71 years of privilege, but desperation drove her to Lupita's penthouse on a cold January morning, pride crumbling like ancient parchment. The doorman hadn't recognized her name. That was the first humiliation, having to explain who she was to someone who would have once scrambled to open doors for her. The second was waiting in the lobby while security confirmed her appointment, sitting on a bench like any common visitor while residents passed by, some recognizing her and whispering behind manicured hands. When the private elevator finally opened to Lupita's floor, Eleanor found herself in a space that defied everything she'd expected. Not the gaudy new money excess she'd imagined, but understated elegance with African art adorning the walls, Louisiana photographers' work capturing the beauty Eleanor had always dismissed as quaint. Lupita stood by the windows, dressed in winter-white cashmere that emphasized her pregnancy's glow. She didn't turn when Eleanor entered, making the older woman wait like a supplicant at court. "You came alone," Lupita finally said, her voice carrying the authority Eleanor had once claimed as her own birthright. "I expected Harrison to accompany you. He usually handles the family's difficulties." "Harrison is meeting with bankruptcy attorneys," Eleanor said, the words bitter as wormwood. "Sterling Blackwood is systematically destroying every partnership my husband built over 40 years. Lupita turned then, and Eleanor saw something she'd never noticed in 5 years, the steel beneath the silk. This wasn't the woman who'd sat silently through family dinners. This was the attorney who'd graduated at the top of her class, who'd won cases against impossible odds, who'd played a longer game than any of them had imagined. "Please, sit," Lupita said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly mortgage on the estate they might lose. "Can I offer you tea? I have a lovely rooibos from South Africa. Or perhaps you'd prefer the Darjeeling you always said was the only civilized choice." The mockery was subtle, but cutting. Eleanor sat, her Chanel suit feeling like armor made of paper. "I came to discuss the children." "My children?" Lupita corrected, settling into her own chair with the grace of someone who'd learned that power wasn't inherited, but earned. The ones you called unfortunate necessities at last year's Memorial Day gathering. Eleanor's face flushed. She'd forgotten about the recordings, the constant surveillance she'd never suspected from someone she'd considered barely worthy of notice. "I've had time to think," Eleanor began, her prepared speech already faltering. "Perhaps I was harsh in my assessments." Lupita's laugh was rich, genuine, devastating. "Harsh? Is that what we're calling it? You hired a private investigator to prove I was after Alan's money. You suggested I have cosmetic surgery to refine my features. You told the admissions board at Pemberton Prep that any children we had would need special consideration due to their mixed heritage." Each word was a dagger, precisely placed. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for the purse, pulling out an envelope she'd hoped would never see light. "I've written a letter," she said, offering it like a white flag. "A public apology. I'll send it to every society newsletter, every club, every board I've ever served on." Lupita didn't take the envelope. Instead, she pulled up something on her tablet, turning it so Eleanor could see. It was a video from 3 Christmases ago, Eleanor holding court at her annual party, explaining to her circle why she'd seated Lupita in the corner. "It's kindness, really. She's more comfortable with the help. They understand each other." "A letter," Lupita said softly, "doesn't erase years of deliberate cruelty." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "What do you want?" "Money? We don't have any left. The estate? It's mortgaged to cover Alan's debts. The family name? You've already destroyed it." "I want you to understand," Lupita said, rising to walk to a shelf where photo albums sat. She pulled one out, opening it to reveal pictures Eleanor had never seen. "This is my family. My grandmother, Evangeline, who raised 9 children after my grandfather was killed for trying to register to vote. My Aunt Cordelia, who integrated the University of Alabama's nursing program. My cousin Isaiah, who runs a legal aid clinic in New Orleans." She turned pages, each image a testament to strength Eleanor had dismissed as insignificant. "These people, whom you banned from my wedding reception, have more dignity in their struggles than your family has in its entire genealogy. I understand you're angry." "Angry?" Lupita's voice remained calm, which was somehow worse than shouting. "I'm not angry, Eleanor. I'm victorious. There's a difference." She moved to another album, this one filled with accomplishments the Sambergs had never acknowledged. "This is me arguing before the Supreme Court at 28. This is the scholarship fund I established before I met Alan. This is the community center in Thibodeau that I funded with my own earnings, not Samberg money." Eleanor stared at the images, seeing for the first time the woman she'd spent 5 years trying to diminish. "You know what the real tragedy is, Eleanor?" Lupita continued, her voice taking on a reflective quality. "I would have been your greatest asset. I would have used my legal brilliance to protect your empire legitimately. I would have raised grandchildren who honored both their heritages equally. I would have brought fresh perspectives that could have evolved your legacy into something meaningful for the modern world." She paused at a particular photo, herself in her wedding dress, radiant with hope. "Look at this woman. She believed in the possibility of bridging worlds. She thought love could overcome prejudice. She was willing to sacrifice everything for acceptance that would never come. You assumed I was nothing because I didn't come from your world," Lupita continued. "You never wondered why a brilliant attorney would give up her career. You never questioned why someone with my credentials would tolerate your treatment. You saw what you wanted to see, a gold digger who got lucky." "Then why?" Eleanor asked, desperation cracking her voice. "Why did you stay?" "Because I loved him," Lupita said simply. "I loved Alan with the kind of devotion you claimed I wasn't capable of feeling. I thought if I proved myself worthy by your standards, you'd accept me. I thought if I gave you grandchildren, you'd finally see me as family." She touched her stomach, where the twins moved constantly now. "But you taught me something valuable, Eleanor. You taught me that there's no amount of excellence that makes you worthy in the eyes of those determined to see you as less than. So I stopped trying to earn your approval and started documenting your decline." Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face paling further. "The country club. They've revoked our membership." "Sterling's wife sits on the board now," Lupita said casually. "Imani Blackwood, formerly Imani Okafor. Brilliant woman. Harvard Law, top of her class. The kind of woman you would have dismissed as a diversity hire, despite her being infinitely more qualified than anyone in your circle. Turns out they've been looking for an excuse to remove you for years. Your comments about the new Saudi members were the final straw. You're destroying everything my family built over generations." "No," Lupita corrected. "I'm revealing what your family always was. The difference is now everyone else can see it too." Eleanor stood on shaking legs, her last card unplayed. "The children, my grandchildren, they'll need their heritage, both sides of it. You can't deny them their birthright out of spite." "Their birthright?" Lupita walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Their birthright is strength earned through struggle, not privilege inherited through accident. Their birthright is the knowledge that their mother stood up to injustice, not the shame of a family that perpetuated it. They'll have questions one day about why they never knew us. And I'll answer them honestly," Lupita replied. "I'll show them these recordings. I'll explain how their grandmother thought their black heritage was something to be bred out. I'll tell them how their grandfather built his fortune on discriminatory practices. I'll make sure they understand exactly why I protected them from you." Eleanor made one last, desperate play. "I could fight for grandparents' rights. The courts would love to hear these recordings," Lupita finished. "Especially the one from last Easter, where you explained your theory about genetic dilution and why you hoped any children would be light enough to pass." The defeat in Eleanor's eyes was complete. She moved toward the elevator, then turned back. "You were never what we thought you were." "No," Lupita agreed. "I was always more. You just couldn't see it through your prejudice. And that blindness, Eleanor, that willful refusal to see my humanity, my brilliance, my worth, that's what destroyed your family, not me. Your own hatred consumed you from within." As the elevator doors closed on Eleanor Whitmore Samberg, Lupita felt the twins respond to her elevated heartbeat. She placed both hands on her stomach, soothing them. "Your grandmother came today," she whispered to them. "The one who'll never teach you that your worth depends on your proximity to whiteness. The one who'll never make you feel like guests at your own family table. The one who'll never know the brilliant, beautiful souls you're going to become." Her phone lit up with messages. Sterling, confirming that Harrison's last business partner had withdrawn support. Thaddeus, noting that Eleanor's charity was under investigation. Imani, reporting that Genevieve's trust fund had been frozen pending tax fraud charges. But the message that mattered most came from her mother in Louisiana. "The nursery is ready, baby. Your real family can't wait to meet those precious ones." Eleanor's plea had failed, as Lupita had known it would. You couldn't apologize for systematic cruelty with a letter. You couldn't undo generations of racism with reluctant regret. And you certainly couldn't claim grandchildren you'd already rejected before they were even born. The first plea was over. Others would come. Harrison with his threats, Genevieve with her tears, Alan with his promises. But they would all fail for the same reason Eleanor had failed. They still thought this was about revenge. They couldn't understand it was about justice. Chapter 5. The business crumbles. Harrison Samberg stood in what used to be his corner office at Samberg Development Group, watching Sterling Blackwood's team remove his personal effects with surgical precision, each item catalogued like evidence at a crime scene. The nameplate that had adorned his desk for 30 years went into a box marked "Former Management." The oil painting of his father, Harrison Sr., was wrapped in brown paper like a corpse in a shroud. The golf trophies, the photos with senators and governors, the symbols of a lifetime's accumulated power, all reduced to cardboard boxes on a dolly. "You have 1 hour to vacate," Sterling Blackwood said from the doorway, his presence filling the space that Harrison had once commanded. "Security will escort you out if necessary." Harrison turned, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. "This is theft. My lawyers have already confirmed the sale was legal," Sterling interrupted, his voice smooth as aged whiskey and twice as potent. "Your daughter-in-law was remarkably thorough, every document properly filed, every transfer legitimately executed. You should have read what your son was signing." The irony burned like acid. Harrison, who'd built an empire on exploiting legal loopholes and technical interpretations, was being destroyed by the very precision he'd once weaponized against others. "She planned this," Harrison said, his voice breaking. "That woman planned this from the beginning." "That woman," Sterling said, stepping into the office, "has a name. Lupita Harris. And no, she didn't plan this from the beginning. She planned this from the moment you people showed her who you really were." Sterling moved to the window, looking out at the view Harrison had treasured. Manhattan spread below like a conquered kingdom. "Do you know what she told me when we first discussed this sale? She said she would have been the best thing that ever happened to your family if you'd let her. She would have used her legal brilliance to protect your empire, raised children who honored both their heritages, brought fresh perspective to your stale dynasty. She was never one of us." "No," Sterling agreed, "she was better, and you were too blind with prejudice to see it." Harrison's phone buzzed. Augustus Cromwell, his oldest business partner, the man who'd been best man at his wedding. He answered desperately. "Augustus, thank God. I need you to call an emergency board meeting. I'm calling to inform you that Cromwell Industries is severing all ties with you, effective immediately." Augustus's voice was cold, formal. "The recordings your daughter-in-law released to the board. Harrison, we can't be associated with someone who used those terms about our Jewish investors." The line went dead. Harrison stared at the phone, then at Sterling, who smiled with satisfied knowledge. "She gave us everything," Sterling said. "Every racist comment you made about your Middle Eastern partners. Every sexist remark about female executives. Every moment you revealed that your success was built not on merit, but on maintaining a system that excluded anyone who didn't look like you." "Business is business," Harrison tried weakly. "Those were private conversations. In your home, with your wife and children present, while Lupita sat silent and recorded every word," Sterling finished. "You discussed insider trading over dinner. You planned discriminatory hiring practices over brandy. You committed crimes while she sat there, invisible to you, documenting everything." Another buzz. Theodore Ashmont this time. Harrison didn't answer, already knowing what the message would say. The empire he'd spent 40 years building was collapsing in 40 days. "Your son came here yesterday," Sterling said conversationally. "Tried to convince me to sell back, offered me double what I paid." Harrison's hope flickered. "And?" "I laughed," Sterling said simply. "Then I showed him the renovation plans. We're turning the executive floor into a scholarship center for black and brown law students. The conference room where you held your all-white board meetings will be renamed the Lupita Harris Justice Center." The cruelty of it was exquisite. Everything Harrison had built to exclude would now be used to include. Every space he'd used to maintain power would become a monument to his downfall. "There must be something," Harrison said, his voice desperate now. "Some deal we can make. You're a businessman, Sterling. Everything has a price." Sterling pulled out his phone, showing Harrison a photo. It was Lupita, radiant in her pregnancy, surrounded by young black women at a legal clinic. She's funding 50 full scholarships to Howard Law. Your former clients are lining up to support her foundation. She's becoming everything you feared, powerful, influential, and completely beyond your reach. Harrison sank into his chair. Not his chair anymore, Sterling's chair now. The twins. She's carrying my grandchildren. She's carrying her children, Sterling corrected. Children who'll be raised to understand their full history, including how their grandfather built his fortune on redlining, discriminatory lending, and systematic exclusion of minorities from economic opportunity. That's not true. Sterling pulled out a tablet, showing scanned documents. These are your company's original lending policies from the 1960s, explicitly stating that loans to colored neighborhoods should be denied or given at predatory rates. Policies that were never formally changed, just hidden better. Harrison's face went ashen. How did you get those? Lupita found them in your home safe, Sterling said. The combination was your wedding anniversary. She said you never changed it because you never thought she was smart enough to try. The final humiliation came in the form of Genevieve, who burst through the door, mascara running, designer dress wrinkled. Daddy, they've frozen my accounts. The IRS says I owe millions in back taxes. They say Lupita gave them... She stopped, seeing Sterling, her face contorting with rage. You're helping that woman destroy us. That woman, Sterling said calmly, is destroying you all by herself. I'm just buying the pieces. Genevieve turned to her father. Do something. You always fix everything. But Harrison had nothing left to fix with. His connections were abandoning him like rats from a sinking ship. His wealth was evaporating. His reputation was destroyed. The tools he'd used to build his empire, intimidation, exclusion, exploitation, were useless against someone who documented every crime and planned every countermove. She gave us a chance, Sterling said, preparing to leave. That Christmas morning, when she revealed the pregnancy. If you'd apologized then, genuinely apologized and changed, she might have shown mercy. But you chose to threaten her instead. Harrison, you sent lawyers after a pregnant woman. Eleanor tried manipulation. Genevieve posted those photos on Instagram, calling Lupita a breeding mare who finally did something useful. Genevieve gasped. How did you... She screenshot everything, Sterling said. Every post, every message, every moment you revealed your true nature. Security arrived. Not the old security who'd worked for Harrison, but Sterling's team. Time's up, the lead officer said. As Harrison was escorted from his office, he passed the portraits of previous Samberg presidents, his father, his grandfather, the line of men who'd built their success on others' exclusion. Soon, those portraits would be gone, replaced by images of the diverse leaders Sterling was bringing in. Tell Lupita, Harrison started. Tell her yourself, Sterling said, though I doubt she'll answer. She's busy building something better from your ashes. Outside the building that bore his name, not for much longer, Harrison stood on the sidewalk like any other terminated employee. His driver was gone, the car repossessed. His credit cards were maxed out, fighting legal battles he couldn't win. His phone buzzed with messages from journalists wanting statements about the discrimination lawsuits being filed by former employees, emboldened by Lupita's revelations. A taxi stopped, and through the window, he saw Lupita in the back seat. She looked at him, her expression neither cruel nor sympathetic, just resolved. She placed a hand on her pregnant belly, a gesture of protection and promise. Then, the taxi pulled away, leaving Harrison standing in the cold, finally understanding what it felt like to be excluded from a world he'd once ruled. The business hadn't just crumbled, it had been deliberately demolished brick by someone he'd never considered capable of holding a hammer. Chapter 6. The medical crisis. The pain started at 3 in the morning, sharp enough to pull Lupita from sleep, her hands instinctively moving to protect the twins as she reached for her phone with trembling fingers. By the time the ambulance arrived at Mount Sinai's private entrance, the news had somehow already reached the Sambergs. Alan stood in the emergency room, disheveled and desperate, trying to convince the security that he was still her husband, still had rights. "I'm sorry, sir," the guard said firmly. "You're not on the approved list." Lupita could hear his protests as they wheeled her past, but her focus was entirely on the two lives inside her, the rhythmic monitors tracking their heartbeats like a prayer she couldn't stop whispering. Dr. Adaeze Okonkwo appeared, her presence immediately calming. "Lupita, we're going to take excellent care of you and the babies. You're experiencing preterm contractions, but we can manage this." Through the glass doors of her private room, Lupita saw them gathering. Alan arguing with administrators, Eleanor on her phone with someone she claimed was the best specialist in Manhattan, Harrison threatening legal action if he wasn't given information. "Should I have security remove them?" Dr. Okonkwo asked, her voice gentle but protective. "No," Lupita said, breathing through another contraction. "Let them stay in the waiting room. Let them understand what it feels like to be powerless when someone is in crisis." The irony wasn't lost on her. When she'd miscarried 2 years ago, a loss the Sambergs had never known about because Alan had been in Tokyo with Celeste, she'd driven herself to the hospital, sat alone in a public waiting room, and grieved in silence. Eleanor had actually called during it, demanding to know why Lupita had missed the charity luncheon. "Mrs. Harris," a new voice interrupted. It was Dr. Everett Prescott, the Sambergs' family physician, the man who'd once suggested her urban diet might affect her fertility. "I've been asked to consult on your case." "By whom?" Dr. Okonkwo's voice carried professional ice. "The family has concerns." "They're not my family anymore," Lupita said firmly despite the pain. "And you're not my doctor. You haven't been since you prescribed anxiety medication instead of running tests when I complained of chronic pain that turned out to be endometriosis." Dr. Prescott's face flushed. "I'm only trying to help. The way you helped when you told Eleanor my pregnancy would be high risk because of what you called genetic incompatibilities," Lupita asked. "The way you helped when you suggested I consider using a surrogate because my body might not be suited for carrying Samberg heirs. Please leave." As he retreated, Thaddeus Carrington arrived, her lawyer looking impeccable despite the early hour. "They're trying to get a court order," he said quietly, claiming that as the biological father, Alan has the right to make medical decisions if you're incapacitated. "I'm not incapacitated," Lupita said clearly, though another contraction made her grip the bed rails. "I'm in preterm labor, fully conscious and legally divorced as of yesterday when the expedited decree came through." "The divorce is final?" The voice from the doorway was Alan's. He'd somehow gotten past security, looking haggard, his usual polish completely gone. "Lupita, please, they're my children too." Dr. Okonkwo moved to remove him, but Lupita raised her hand. "Let him say what he came to say." Alan approached slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might flee. "I know I failed you. I know I was a coward, but those babies are babies. They're innocent in all this. If something happens—" "Something is happening," Lupita said. "I'm in preterm labor at 28 weeks because of the stress your family has put me through. The constant legal threats, the harassment, the attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs." Through the window, she could see Eleanor pacing, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling every society doctor she knew, trying to find one who would override Lupita's choices. "I never wanted it to go this far," Alan said weakly. "No," Lupita agreed. "You just wanted a quiet divorce where I disappeared with the small settlement while you married Celeste and had children you could acknowledge publicly. You wanted me to be grateful for the scraps of our marriage while you kept the feast." Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Dr. Okonkwo checked the monitors, her expression concerned but controlled. We need to administer medication to stop the contractions. The steroids for the baby's lungs are already working, but we need to buy more time. Whatever they need, Lupita said, then looked at Alan. You should go. I could… What? Hold my hand? The way you did when my father died? Stand by my side? The way you did when your mother called me breeding stock at Thanksgiving? Fight for me? The way you did when your sister spread rumors that I'd trapped you with pregnancy? Alan's face crumbled. Behind him, Harrison appeared, his usual commanding presence diminished. We have rights. You have nothing, Thaddeus interrupted, producing documents. The court has already ruled on your emergency petition. Given the documented history of emotional abuse and the stress it's causing my client's pregnancy, you're ordered to maintain a 500-foot distance unless explicitly invited. This is our grandchildren. Eleanor had finally made it past security, her voice shrill with desperation. You can't keep us from our grandchildren. Lupita looked at the woman who'd made her feel small for 5 years, who'd questioned her worth at every opportunity, who'd suggested she was lucky to be allowed into their family. Eleanor looked older, diminished, her carefully maintained facade cracking like cheap foundation. These are my children, Lupita said quietly but firmly. They will be born into love, not obligation. They will know their worth from their first breath, not spend their lives trying to earn it from people who see their blackness as a deficiency to be overcome. The medication was working. The contractions were slowing, spacing out. The twins' heartbeats remained strong on the monitor. 2 fighters, like their mother. I could have loved you, Lupita said, looking at each of them. I wanted to love you. I came into your family with so much hope, so much willingness to bridge our worlds. But you saw my love as weakness, my culture as less than, my presence as temporary. Genevieve arrived last, breathless and dramatic as always. The media is outside. They're saying you've banned us from seeing the babies. The optics are terrible. The optics, Lupita laughed, though it hurt. Of course that's your concern. Not the baby's health, not my well-being, but how this looks to your social circle. She struggled to sit up more, despite Dr. Okonkwo's gentle, restraining hand. Let me tell you about optics, Genevieve. The optics of you posting photos from my baby shower, the one I wasn't invited to plan, mocking the gifts my Louisiana family sent. The optics of you telling your followers that I was finally useful after 5 years of marriage. The optics of you suggesting I should be grateful Alan didn't leave me sooner. Those were private posts. Nothing is private in the digital age, Lupita said, just like nothing was private when you live-streamed my miscarriage aftermath, when I came to that family dinner still bleeding, still grieving, and you complained that I wasn't being festive enough for your Instagram stories. The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors. The Sambergs stood frozen, perhaps finally understanding the depth of their cruelty. Dr. Okonkwo stepped forward. Everyone needs to leave now. My patient needs rest. As security began escorting them out, Eleanor turned back. We'll fight this. We have resources. You have debt, Lupita corrected. Mountains of it, all coming due now that Sterling owns your assets. You have legal bills you can't pay and criminal investigations you can't stop. You have nothing left to fight with except pride, and pride doesn't pay lawyers. This isn't over, Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's been over since Christmas morning, Lupita replied. You just didn't know it yet. The room emptied except for Thaddeus and Dr. Okonkwo. The crisis was passing, the twins were safe, but the emotional toll weighed heavy. Lupita touched her stomach, feeling the movement within, life persisting despite everything. Your mother is here, Thaddeus said gently. She flew in from Louisiana. Should I send her in? Lupita nodded, tears finally coming. When Evangeline Harris entered, Bringing the scent of home and unconditional love, Lupita broke down completely. "My brave girl," her mother whispered, holding her carefully. "My brilliant, brave girl. You don't have to be strong right now. I've got you." "Mama," Lupita sobbed. "They stood right there and acted like they had rights to my babies. After everything they did, everything they said, they still think they're entitled to my children." "Baby," Evangeline said, stroking her daughter's hair, "people like that think they're entitled to everything. But entitlement ain't the same as deserving, and they don't deserve nothing from you or these precious babies." Through the window, Lupita could see the Sambergs being escorted out by security. They looked small, ordinary, stripped of the power they'd wielded so carelessly. They would go home to their crumbling estate and their empty legacy, while she would bring life into the world, life they would never poison with their prejudice. "You know what your daddy would say?" Evangeline asked softly. "He'd say you're like that magnolia tree in our backyard. Storms come, winds blow, but you bend without breaking, and when the storm passes, you bloom even more beautiful than before." The twins moved, responding to their grandmother's voice, and Lupita felt peace wash over her. These babies would know this voice, this love, this unconditional acceptance from their first breath. "The nurses told me what happened," Evangeline continued, "how they tried to force their way in, how that fool doctor tried to take over. Baby, you stood your ground even in labor. That's the kind of strength them babies gonna inherit. Not the Samberg name or money, but the Harris strength, the kind that can't be bought or stolen." Dr. Okonkwo returned with positive news. "The contractions have stopped completely. The babies are stable. You'll need to stay for observation, but I believe we've avoided early delivery." As night fell over Manhattan, Lupita lay in her hospital bed, her mother in the chair beside her, and felt the profound difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose. The Sambergs had shown their true nature in her moment of vulnerability, still grasping, still demanding, still believing their wants superseded her needs. But tomorrow, her chosen family would fill this room. Sterling and his wife would come with flowers. Her cousins would arrive with Louisiana cooking smuggled past hospital security. Her aunts would circle her with prayers and protection. The twins would be surrounded by love that demanded nothing but their existence. The medical crisis had passed, but it had revealed everything. In her moment of greatest vulnerability, the Sambergs had thought only of their rights, their image, their desires. They had proven, finally and completely, that they deserved no place in her children's lives. The twins would be born early but strong. They would know struggle, but also triumph. They would understand that family isn't about blood or names or inherited wealth, but about who shows up when you're broken and helps you heal. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent to the drama in this room. But inside, a mother protected her unborn children from a legacy of poison, choosing instead to give them a heritage of strength, love, and unshakable dignity. Chapter 7. The Social Destruction. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where 300 of New York's elite gathered in their finest to celebrate philanthropy while practicing hypocrisy. Lupita entered through the main doors like a queen returning from exile, wearing a custom gown by Aurora James that celebrated her pregnancy with elegant draping. The black designer had insisted on dressing her for free, calling it an honor to dress a woman who's rewriting the rules. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused at lips. The entire room turned to watch her descent down the grand staircase, Sterling Blackwood at her side in perfectly tailored Oswald Boateng, their combined presence announcing a new order. "Breathe," Sterling murmured, his hand steady at her elbow. "Let them look. Let them see what power actually looks like." Eleanor stood near the donation display, frozen beside a photograph of herself as Foundation President, a title she'd held for 2 decades. Her face cycled through emotions: shock, rage, humiliation, and finally, desperate calculation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Foundation's new president, Indira Patel, announced from the podium. "Please welcome our diamond sponsor for this evening, Ms. Lupita Harris, whose generous donation will fund our new initiative providing legal aid to women escaping domestic abuse." The applause was scattered at first, then grew as people recognized the strategic importance of aligning with the woman who'd brought down the Sandbergs. Lupita moved through the crowd, greeting the same people who'd once treated her as invisible. "Lupita, darling." Millicent Astley air-kissed her cheeks, the same woman who'd once asked if she was the help at a garden party. "You look absolutely radiant. Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you, Millicent. I remember you said pregnancy would ruin my figure at last year's gala. How perspectives change." The older woman's face tightened, but she forced a laugh. "Did I? How foolish of me." Lupita moved on, each interaction a masterclass in polite devastation. She didn't need to be cruel. The truth was weapon enough. Harrison approached, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. "This is inappropriate. You shouldn't be here in your condition." "My condition?" Lupita smiled. "You mean pregnant with the heirs you spent years demanding? Or do you mean my condition as the owner of what used to be your empire? The Foundation was built on Sandberg money. Built on redlining profits and discriminatory lending," Lupita corrected, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I have the documents, Harrison. Every illegal practice, every bribe, every violation. Should we discuss them here, or would you prefer I save them for the FBI?" He retreated, his face ashen. Across the room, Genevieve held court with her usual circle, but the women were distinctly cool, their body language expressing the social distance that had opened between them and the disgraced family. "Did you see?" one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Celeste Beaumont was arrested yesterday. Tax evasion and fraud. They say Lupita provided the evidence." Genevieve's wineglass shook. She'd been Celeste's biggest defender, had facilitated the affair, had laughed about it at brunches Lupita was never invited to attend. The evening's program began, and Lupita took her place at the head table, the seat that had always been Eleanor's. The older woman was relegated to the back, at a table partially obscured by a pillar, sitting with other fallen social climbers who'd lost their positions through scandal or bankruptcy. "Before we begin," Indira said from the podium, "I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the absence of an elephant. Eleanor Whitmore Sandberg's resignation from the board was accepted last week, following revelations of embezzlement and misuse of foundation funds." Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor's theft had been an open secret, but having it announced publicly was social execution. "However," Indira continued, "thanks to Ms. Harris's forensic accounting skills and generous personal donation, we've recovered the missing funds and can continue our mission without interruption." The applause was thunderous. Lupita stood, acknowledging it with grace, then moved to the podium herself. "I want to announce a new initiative," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "The Harris Foundation for Economic Justice will provide full scholarships to Howard Law School for 50 students annually, specifically focusing on those from communities historically excluded from legal education." She looked directly at Eleanor as she continued. "For too long, certain families have hoarded opportunity, using their privilege to maintain systems that exclude others. That ends now. Furthermore," Lupita continued, "we'll be partnering with Sterling Blackwood's enterprise to convert properties previously used for discriminatory practices into community legal centers. The first will be in the building that once housed Sandberg Development Group." Alan stood abruptly from his table. He'd only been allowed in as someone's plus one, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "You can't." "I can, and I have," Lupita said calmly. Every building your family used to deny mortgages to black families will now serve those communities. Every office where your father planned redlining strategies will become a classroom for future civil rights lawyers. The room was silent, watching the public demolition of a dynasty. This wasn't just business, it was personal, political, and perfectly legal. I also want to address the whispers I've been hearing all evening, Lupita continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. Yes, I recorded the Sambergs. Every dinner where they discussed their superiority while I served them food. Every gathering where they mocked my heritage while I stood silent. Every moment they revealed their true nature while assuming I was too stupid to understand. She pulled out her phone, holding it up. This device captured truth, not revenge, not spite, but truth. And if any of you are worried about your own past interactions with me, perhaps you should reflect on why that concerns you. One more announcement, Lupita said, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. My children will be born this summer. They will carry the Harris name exclusively. They will know their full history, the Louisiana roots that run deep and strong, the ancestors who survived what others' ancestors inflicted. They will be raised with the values the Sambergs claimed to possess but never demonstrated: integrity, compassion, and justice. She stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, but she wasn't finished. She walked directly to Eleanor's table, every eye in the room following. You wanted me to be grateful, she said quietly, but in the silence, everyone could hear. Grateful for your tolerance, your condescension, your crumbs. Instead, I'm grateful for your cruelty. It taught me my own strength. It showed me who you really are, and it gave me the motivation to dismantle everything you built on others' exclusion. Eleanor's composure finally shattered. You vindictive little... Careful, Lupita warned. Everyone's recording. Your words will be on social media within minutes, although I suppose your reputation can't sink much lower. She turned to address the room one final time. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. For those who shunned me when I was Mrs. Samberg, your sudden friendship now is noted and declined. For those who stood by and watched the Sambergs' treatment of me, your silence was complicity. But for those few who showed kindness when it wasn't advantageous, you know who you are. Thank you. As she walked toward the exit, people parted like the Red Sea. Some reached out, trying to touch her, to claim association with her victory. She ignored them all except for one, a young black woman who'd been a server at Samberg events, who'd once slipped her a tissue when Eleanor's cruelty had brought tears. Thank you, Maria, Lupita said, embracing her. The foundation will be in touch about law school scholarships. Ms. Harris, Maria whispered, tears in her eyes. My daughter watched your interview on the news. She said she wants to be like you, someone who stands up to bullies and wins. You've given her a hero who looks like her. The weight of that responsibility settled on Lupita's shoulders, but it was a weight she carried proudly. This wasn't just about her revenge anymore. It was about every Maria, every daughter who needed to see that power could be challenged, that truth could triumph. The last image the society photographers captured was Lupita leaving on Sterling's arm, backlit by the museum's lights like an avenging angel, while the Sambergs sat in the shadows of their own making. The social destruction was complete. Every club would revoke their memberships. Every board would demand their resignations. Every invitation would be withdrawn. They would become pariahs in the only world they'd ever valued, and unlike Lupita, they had nowhere else to go. But the true destruction went deeper than social standing. It was the knowledge, spreading through their circle like wildfire, that they'd been outsmarted by someone they'd considered beneath them, that every racist joke, every cruel comment, every moment of dismissive arrogance had been documented by the woman serving their wine. As Lupita's car pulled away from the museum, she could see through the windows as the gala continued without her. the conversations animated, the gossip flowing as freely as the champagne. By tomorrow, every detail would be dissected in society pages and social media. The Sambergs' humiliation would be complete and public. But tonight, she had more important things to attend to. Her mother was flying in from Louisiana tomorrow, bringing with her the warmth and wisdom the Samberg world had never possessed. Together, they would finish preparing the nursery, filling it with love instead of judgment, with pride instead of prejudice. The girl from Louisiana they'd tried to diminish had become the queen of their court, and her first decree was their banishment. Chapter 8. The Legal Victory. The courtroom in the New York Supreme Court building had seen dynasties rise and fall, but rarely had it witnessed a demolition as complete as what unfolded on that April morning. Judge Cordelia Ashford, known for her intolerance of prejudice and her encyclopedic knowledge of family law, presided over the custody hearing that had drawn media attention from around the world. The Sambergs had pooled their remaining resources for one last legal assault, hiring Benjamin Thornwood, the attorney who'd never lost a custody case. Lupita sat with quiet dignity, her pregnancy now advanced, flanked by Thaddeus Carrington and his team. She'd chosen a simple navy dress and her grandmother's pearl necklace, a visual counterpoint to Eleanor's desperate designer outfit that screamed old money she no longer possessed. "Your Honor," Thornwood began, his voice resonating with practiced authority, "my clients seek reasonable grandparent visitation rights. Despite the acrimonious divorce, these children deserve to know their paternal heritage." "Their heritage?" Thaddeus stood slowly, his presence commanding despite his smaller stature. "Your Honor, I have here 17 hours of recorded conversations that detail exactly what heritage the Sambergs wish to impart." The bailiff distributed tablets to all parties. Judge Ashford put on her reading glasses, her expression growing increasingly stern as she listened. Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom. "If she insists on having children, we'll need to ensure they're raised properly. None of that ethnic nonsense she grew up with. They'll need to learn to overcome their disadvantages." Then Harrison. "The boys can inherit, but if they're girls, well, mixed girls have limited prospects anyway. We'll set up small trusts, nothing substantial." Genevieve's contribution was perhaps the worst. "At least if they're light enough, we can say they're Mediterranean. No one needs to know about the other side." Alan's voice, slurred with alcohol. "I'll have real heirs with Celeste. These ones with Lupita are just obligations." The courtroom was silent, except for the recordings. Each word was a nail in the coffin of their case. Judge Ashford's face had turned to stone. "There's more, Your Honor," Thaddeus said. "Financial records showing the Sambergs diverted money meant for a trust for the unborn children into their own accounts. Medical records showing they tried to have Ms. Harris declared mentally incompetent to gain control of her assets. And this," he produced a document with a flourish, "a contract they tried to force Ms. Harris to sign, giving them full custody in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges they knew were baseless." "This is vindictive fiction," Eleanor burst out, breaking protocol. "That woman has poisoned everyone against us. She's turned our own words." "Your own words condemn you," Judge Ashford interrupted, her voice arctic. "Please continue, Mr. Carrington." Thaddeus played another recording, this one from just a week prior, captured by a private investigator the Sambergs had hired who'd switched sides after hearing their plans. "Once we get custody," Harrison's voice said clearly, "we can limit her influence. Supervised visits only. We'll tell the children their mother was unstable, possibly dangerous. By the time they're old enough to question it, they'll be ours completely." Lupita felt the twins move, as if they too were rejecting their would-be captors. She placed her hands protectively over them, drawing strength from their presence. "Your Honor," Thornwood tried desperately, "my clients were speaking in anger, in disappointment. Surely their words shouldn't override their biological connection." "Their biological connection? Lupita spoke for the first time, her voice clear and strong. They've never once asked about the baby's health, never inquired about names, never offered genuine support. They see my children as possessions, as tools to rebuild their reputation, as heirs to a poisoned legacy. She stood, despite the weight of her pregnancy, addressing the court with the skill that had once made her a formidable attorney. Your Honor, I have here a different kind of evidence. Letters from the community in Thibodaux, Louisiana, where my children will know their other grandparents. Testimonials from the 50 law students whose scholarships I'm funding, who promise to be role models for my children. Statements from successful black professionals who've offered to mentor them, to show them that excellence doesn't require proximity to whiteness. She turned to face the Sambergs directly. You had 5 years to see me as family. You chose instead to see me as an interloper. You had 9 months to embrace these children. You chose instead to scheme for their possession. You had countless opportunities to choose love over prejudice. You chose your legacy over their well-being. The court has heard enough, Judge Ashford announced. Mr. and Mrs. Samberg, Ms. Samberg, Mr. Alan Samberg, your petition for grandparent rights is not only denied, but permanently barred. Furthermore, this court issues a restraining order preventing any contact with Ms. Harris or her children until the children reach the age of 18 and can decide for themselves. You can't, Harrison started. I can, and I have, the judge continued. Additionally, I'm referring these recordings to the district attorney for investigation of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit custodial interference. Bailiff, please ensure the defendants surrender their passports before leaving. Eleanor collapsed into her chair. Alan's face had gone grey. Genevieve was crying, her mascara running in streams that no amount of privilege could stop. Furthermore, Judge Ashford said, her voice carrying the weight of final judgment, this court orders the immediate liquidation of any remaining Samberg assets to pay the legal fees Ms. Harris has incurred defending against your frivolous lawsuits. The era of using wealth to bludgeon others into submission is over, at least in my courtroom. As court security moved to collect their passports, Lupita felt a sudden, sharp pain. Liquid warmth spread beneath her, and she gripped the table. My water just broke, she said calmly, though her heart was racing. The courtroom erupted in motion. Thaddeus called for an ambulance while court officers cleared a path. In the chaos, Alan tried to approach, but security blocked him. Those are my children being born, he shouted. No, Judge Ashford said firmly. They're Ms. Harris's children, and the only thing you've contributed to their birth is the stress that's causing it to happen 3 weeks early. As the EMTs arrived with a wheelchair, Lupita looked back one last time at the family that had tried to break her. They stood in a huddle of defeat, their expensive clothes unable to hide their poverty of spirit, their prestigious name unable to command respect they'd never earned. The babies are coming, she said to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone. They're coming into a world where their mother stood up to injustice and won, where their strength comes from struggle overcome, not privilege inherited, where they'll never question their worth because someone else's prejudice tried to diminish it. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, the courthouse reporters surged forward. One shouted, "Ms. Harris, any final words about the verdict?" She paused, looking directly into the cameras. My children will be born free, free from the toxic legacy of the Sambergs, free from the burden of conditional love, free to be exactly who they are, magnificent in their complexity. That's not a verdict, that's a victory. The ambulance doors closed on the image of the Sambergs being escorted to a police van for processing, their dynasty ending not with dignity, but with handcuffs and headlines. Justice had been served, and now life, new, untainted life, was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Final Begging. The hospital room was filled with flowers from well-wishers, each arrangement a testament to Lupita's triumph, when the Sambergs made their final desperate assault on her resolve. They came together, all four of them, having somehow convinced hospital security they were there for a medical emergency. They stood in her doorway like spectres of the life she'd escaped, Eleanor clutching a Hermes bag that contained their last liquid assets, Harrison in a suit that hadn't been dry cleaned in weeks, Genevieve wearing sunglasses to hide eyes swollen from crying, and Alan, hollow-eyed and unshaven, carrying an envelope that trembled in his hands. The twins, born healthy despite their early arrival, lay in their bassinet beside Lupita's bed. Amara Evangeline Harris, named for strength and her great-grandmother, and Malcolm Thurgood Harris, carrying the legacy of justice and truth. They were perfect, Amara with Lupita's fierce eyes and determined chin, Malcolm with a gentle spirit that seemed to radiate peace. "You shouldn't be here," Lupita said calmly, her hand moving to the call button. "Please," Eleanor said, and the word seemed to physically pain her. "Please, just hear us out." It was the first time in 5 years Lupita had heard Eleanor say please without sarcasm. She hesitated, then nodded to the security guard who'd appeared. 5 minutes. They entered like supplicants approaching a throne, their usual arrogance replaced by something Lupita had never seen before, genuine desperation. "We've lost everything," Harrison began, his voice barely a whisper. "The houses, the cars, the business. We're living in Genevieve's studio apartment. All four of us in 700 square feet. The irony," Lupita said softly, "of you seeking sympathy for living conditions better than what most Americans consider normal." "We know we were wrong," Genevieve burst out, tears flowing freely. "We were horrible, racist, cruel. We treated you like you were nothing when you were everything. We destroyed our own family because we couldn't see past our prejudice." Lupita studied them, these people who'd once seemed so powerful, now reduced to begging at the bedside they'd tried to bar her from. "What do you want?" she asked directly. Alan stepped forward, extending the envelope. "We're prepared to sign anything, any confession, any admission, any public apology you want. We'll go on television and admit everything we did. We'll testify against our former associates who participated in the discrimination. We'll dedicate our lives to your foundation if that's what it takes." "In exchange for—" "One photo," Eleanor whispered. "One photo with our grandchildren. One moment to see them, to know they exist, to have something to remember when we're old and alone." The twins stirred, making small sounds that drew everyone's attention. Malcolm opened his eyes, Lupita's eyes, and seemed to look directly at the Sambergs. Amara yawned, her tiny fist waving in the air like she was already fighting. "Do you know what you took from me?" Lupita asked quietly. "Not the obvious things. My career, my dignity, my father's last moments, but the subtle thefts. The way I stopped singing because Eleanor said my voice was too earthy. The way I stopped cooking my grandmother's recipes because Harrison called the smells invasive. The way I stopped wearing bright colors because Genevieve said they made me look aggressive." She stood, moving to the bassinet, lifting Amara into her arms. The baby settled against her chest with absolute trust. "You tried to erase me," she continued, "piece by piece, comment by comment, slight by slight. You wanted me to disappear into your whiteness, to become nothing more than a vessel for heirs you could mold into your image." "We were wrong," Alan said, his voice breaking. "God, Lupita, we were so wrong. I loved you, I did, but I loved my family's approval more. I chose them over you every single time, and now I've lost everything that mattered." "No," Lupita corrected. "Now you understand what loss feels like. There's a difference." Eleanor fell to her knees, something Lupita would never have imagined possible. "I'm 71 years old," she said, her voice raw. "I've spent my entire life believing lies my parents taught me, perpetuating poison I never questioned. These babies, your babies, they're the only chance for our bloodline to mean something better. Please, I'm begging you, let us have one photo, let us see them once." Your bloodline? Lupita asked. These children don't carry your blood, Eleanor. According to you, blood is about purity, about maintaining lines, about preservation of what you consider superior. These children's blood is mixed, mingled, magnificent in its complexity. Everything you feared, everything you tried to prevent. She picked up Malcolm, holding both twins now, their weight a reminder of what she'd protected them from. But here's what you never understood, she continued. These children do carry something from you, something I wish I could remove but can't. They carry the genetic possibility of your hatred. Somewhere in their DNA is the potential for the kind of cruelty you perfected, and I will spend every day of their lives making sure that potential never actualizes. Harrison pulled out a checkbook, his hands shaking. We have one asset left, a trust fund in Switzerland that the lawyers couldn't touch. $2 million. It's yours, all of it, for one photo. $2 million for a photo. Lupita almost laughed. You still think everything has a price? Everything does, Genevieve said desperately. You proved that. You bought our destruction. Now let us buy one memory. Lupita looked at them, really looked at them. Eleanor on her knees, designer dress crumpled. Harrison with his checkbook, trying to purchase what money couldn't buy. Genevieve, stripped of her social media filters and her carefully curated life. Alan, the man she'd once loved, reduced to a shadow of his former self. Let me tell you about the price of memory, Lupita said, her voice taking on a quality that made them all lean in. Every night for 2 years, I paid the price of remembering your cruelty. I'd lie awake replaying every insult, every dismissal, every moment you made me feel less than human. The price of those memories was pieces of my soul that I had to reclaim one by one. She walked to the window, still holding both babies. The price of memory is also what these children will never have to pay. They'll never have memories of being told their hair is wrong, their skin is too dark, their heritage is shameful. They'll never remember sitting at a dinner table where they're tolerated instead of celebrated. But they'll have questions, Eleanor started. Yes, Lupita agreed, and I'll answer them. I'll tell them their biological grandparents existed but couldn't love them properly. I'll explain it the way you explain any tragedy to children, honestly but age-appropriately. By the time they're old enough to understand the full truth, they'll be so secure in who they are that your rejection will be a historical footnote, not a defining wound. You want to buy a memory? She continued. Let me tell you about memories. I remember Eleanor telling me my children would need nose jobs to correct their ethnic features. I remember Harrison suggesting we use donors to ensure better genetic outcomes. I remember Genevieve posting that I was breeding stock that finally produced. I remember Alan standing silent through it all. She set the twins back in their bassinet, then pulled out her phone. But I also remember this. She played a voice recording from 2 years ago, her own voice, strong and clear. I promise you, future children, that you will never doubt your worth. You will never beg for scraps of love. You will never feel like guests at your own family table. You will be surrounded by people who see your beauty, your brilliance, your blackness as gifts to celebrate, not defects to overcome. That's the only memory that matters, she said. The promise I made before they were even conceived. The promise your hatred made necessary. So no? Eleanor's voice was barely audible. No photo? No moment? Nothing? Lupita moved to the window, looking out at the city below. You know what? I'll give you something better than a photo. Hope flickered in their eyes. I'll give you the truth, she said. These children will grow up knowing exactly who you are. Not the lies you'd tell them, not the revised history you'd create, but the truth. They'll see the recordings. They'll read the transcripts. They'll understand that their maternal family chose love while their paternal family chose hate. She turned back to face them. And when they're 18, if they choose to find you, if you're still alive. That will be their decision. But they'll come armed with truth, immunized against your poison, strong in the knowledge of who they are. They won't come as supplicants or grandchildren. They'll come as judges, and you'll have to answer for everything. 18 years, Alan whispered. They'll be adults. We'll be strangers. You're strangers now, Lupita said. You've always been strangers. You just had proximity, not relationship. Position, not love. Claims, not bonds. Harrison made one last attempt, pulling out a leather folder. These are the deeds to properties in Europe. Hidden assets the lawyers don't know about, worth at least 10 million. All of it for just one moment with them. 10 million for a moment? Lupita shook her head. Harrison, you could offer me $1 billion, and my answer would be the same. These children are not for sale. Their safety, their peace, their freedom from your toxicity, these things have no price. Then what was the point of destroying us? Genevieve asked bitterly. If not for money, if not for revenge, why? For them, Lupita said simply, gesturing to the sleeping twins. Every move I made, every document I gathered, every asset I seized, it was all to ensure they would never be vulnerable to you. Your destruction was just the necessary step to their protection. The security guard reappeared. Ma'am, their time is up. As they turned to leave, broken and empty-handed, Eleanor looked back one last time. Will you at least tell them we existed? They'll know you existed, Lupita said, the same way we know diseases that have been eradicated existed. As something dangerous that previous generations had to overcome so future ones could be free. That's cruel, Alan said quietly. No, Lupita corrected. Cruel was telling me I was lucky you chose me. Cruel was watching your mother humiliate me while you stayed silent. Cruel was sleeping with another woman while I miscarried our first child alone. What I'm doing isn't cruel. It's necessary. We'll wait, Eleanor said suddenly, desperately. 18 years we'll wait. We'll change. We'll grow. We'll become people worthy of knowing them. Maybe you will, Lupita said. Or maybe you'll spend 18 years the way you spent the last 5, believing you're entitled to what you haven't earned. Either way, it won't matter. By then, these children will be fully formed, brilliant, confident adults who know exactly who they are. Your approval or disapproval will be irrelevant to them. As they finally left, shuffling out like the broken remnants they'd become, Lupita heard Harrison say to Eleanor, "We did this to ourselves." It was the first true thing any of them had said in 5 years. The door closed behind them with the soft click of finality. Through the window, Lupita could see them in the parking lot below, 4 figures huddled against the wind, made small by their losses, walking toward a future emptied of everything they'd valued. The twins slept on, peaceful in their innocence, protected by their mother's strength and surrounded by the love of chosen family who'd arrived throughout the day. Her mother Evangeline, her aunts and cousins from Louisiana, Sterling and his wife, the law students she'd mentored, the community that had claimed her when her married family had rejected her. "You did the right thing," Evangeline said softly, having witnessed the whole exchange from the corner. "Those babies don't need nothing from people who would have taught them to hate half of themselves." "I know, Mama," Lupita said, exhaustion finally hitting her. But seeing them like that, broken, desperate, finally understanding what they lost, it doesn't feel like victory. It just feels necessary. "Necessary is its own kind of victory, baby," Evangeline said wisely. "You protected your children from poison dressed up as privilege. That's the greatest victory a mother can achieve." The final begging was over. The Sandbergs would get no photo, no moment, no memory to soften their suffering. They would get exactly what they'd given, nothing but the truth of their own choices, reflected back at them for the rest of their lives. As night fell over New York, Lupita held her sleeping twins and knew that she'd given them the greatest gift possible, freedom from the burden of conditional love, from the weight of others' prejudice, from the poison of a legacy that would have taught them to be less than they were. The Sandbergs would live with their regret, but her children would simply live, freely, fully, magnificently. 5 years had passed since the Christmas morning that changed everything, and Lupita stood in the garden of her estate in Martha's vineyard, watching her children play in the golden afternoon light. Amara and Malcolm, now 4.5, were brilliant souls who carried themselves with the confidence of the deeply loved. They spoke 3 languages, English, French, and Creole, and knew their history from both sides, the beautiful and the ugly, the triumphant and the tragic. They were being raised by a village that included their grandmother Evangeline, their aunts from Louisiana, and a chosen family of successful, principled people who modeled excellence without arrogance. "Mama, look!" Malcolm called, showing her the painting he'd made, swirls of color that reminded her of the Louisiana sunsets her father had loved. "It's you and us and Grand-mère and everyone who loves us." "It's beautiful, baby," she said, kneeling despite her designer dress to examine his work properly. "You've got your great-grandfather's artistic eye." Amara ran over, her braids flying, carrying a book of poetry she'd been attempting to read. "Mama, what does legacy mean?" Before Lupita could answer, a car pulled up the long driveway. She recognized the vehicle. A rental, modest, nothing like the luxury cars that used to define the Sambergs' arrival anywhere. They emerged slowly, all 4 of them, but they were barely recognizable as the people who'd once terrorized her existence. Eleanor, now 76, walked with a cane, her hair completely grey, her designer clothes replaced by simple, practical wear. Harrison, thin and bent, looked every one of his 78 years. Genevieve had gained weight, her Instagram perfection abandoned for reality. And Alan looked hollow, like a man who'd been emptied and never refilled. "Stay here, loves," Lupita told her children, walking toward the uninvited guests while her security team moved into position. "We know we're violating the restraining order," Harrison said immediately. "We're prepared to be arrested, but we had to come." "Why?" Lupita asked simply. Eleanor reached into her bag, not Hermes anymore, just simple leather, and pulled out a thick folder. "We've spent 5 years doing what you said, living with our choices, and we've learned things." She opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, photos, printed emails. "You're in the news constantly. Your foundation has put 300 students through law school. Your children's book is a bestseller. Malcolm's art was featured in that gallery showing of child prodigies. Amara's reading at a high school level. You've been watching us." "From a distance," Alan said quietly. "Always from a distance, never violating the order until today. But we've seen everything, every triumph, every milestone we missed." Genevieve stepped forward. "We've been going to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where you pay someone to agree with you. We've confronted what we were, what we did." She pulled out her phone, showing Lupita a screen. "I've been volunteering at a community center in the Bronx, teaching kids social media literacy for free. The director doesn't know who I am. I use my middle name. But I'm trying to give back something, anything, to balance what I took." Harrison cleared his throat. "I've been testifying against my former associates, my old company policies. I've helped convict 17 executives for discrimination. I'm known as the traitor who turned on his own kind. It's the only useful thing I've ever done." "And I teach," Eleanor said, her voice stronger, "English as a second language to immigrants. The people I once thought were beneath me are now the ones teaching me about resilience, about courage, about starting over when everything is lost." Alan hadn't spoken beyond his initial words. He stood apart slightly, looking past Lupita to where the children played, visible through the garden gate. "Is that them?" he whispered. Lupita turned to look at her children. Amara was reading to Malcolm now, her voice clear and confident. They were golden in the afternoon light, perfect in their innocence, complete in their security. "Yes," she said simply. They're beautiful, Eleanor breathed. They're so beautiful. They're everything you feared, Lupita said. Proudly black, brilliantly mixed, culturally rich, completely themselves. They know their worth comes from within, not from others' validation. They speak with their ancestors' voices and dream with unlimited possibility. We know, Harrison said. We know what we lost. We know what we threw away. We're not here to ask for forgiveness or access or anything we don't deserve. Then why are you here? Alan finally spoke fully. To give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document. We're signing away any claim to inheritance, any future lawsuits, any possibility of challenging your choices, he explained. But more than that, we're leaving the country. Eleanor's sister in Scotland will take us in. We'll never bother you again. But we needed you to know, Eleanor said, tears flowing freely, that you won. Not just the money or the custody or the revenge. You won because you were right about everything. We were monsters dressed in designer clothes. We were poison wrapped in privilege, and you saved your children from us. Lupita looked at them, really looked at them. They were broken, but perhaps in that breaking, they'd found something like humanity. Too late for it to matter, but real nonetheless. Mama, Amara's voice called. Can we show our new friends our paintings? The Sambergs froze, hearing her voice for the first time, clear, confident, unburdened. I'll be right there, sweetheart, Lupita called back, then faced the Sambergs one last time. You want to know about victory, she said. Victory is my children never experiencing a moment of self-doubt because of their race. Victory is them being surrounded by successful black professionals who show them daily that excellence has many faces. Victory is them knowing their history, all of it, and still standing proud. She gestured toward the house. Victory is Sterling Blackwood being their godfather, teaching Malcolm about business while respecting his artistic soul. Victory is Judge Cordelia Ashford teaching Amara about justice and law. Victory is their grandmother Evangeline telling them stories of ancestors who survived the unsurvivable. But the greatest victory? She looked directly at Alan. The greatest victory is that they don't know you exist. You're not the villains in their story, because you're not in their story at all. They don't have a void where paternal grandparents should be, because that space is filled with chosen family who earn their place daily. Eleanor sobbed quietly. Harrison placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. You fought for them, Genevieve said. When we tried to take them, you fought. I didn't fight for them, Lupita corrected. I fought for the right to raise them free from your poison. There's a difference. A car pulled up. Sterling's Tesla, right on time for the children's piano lessons. He emerged, saw the Sambergs, and immediately moved to Lupita's side. Everything okay? He asked, his presence a wall of protection. They were just leaving, Lupita said, forever. As the Sambergs turned to go, Alan looked back one last time. Do they know my name? No, Lupita said with finality. They know their father was someone who couldn't love them properly, so I loved them twice as hard. That's all they need to know. The Sambergs got into their rental car and drove away. Lupita knew it was the last time she'd ever see them. They would go to Scotland, live in exile, and eventually die, knowing they'd lost not just a legal battle, but the chance to know two extraordinary souls. Mama! Malcolm ran up, grabbing her hand. Come see! Amara wrote a poem about our family. As the children pulled her toward the house, chattering excitedly about their day, Lupita felt the last weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Behind them, the rental car disappeared down the road, taking with it the last remnants of a toxic legacy. In the garden, Amara stood on a small stage they'd built for performances, her voice clear and strong. We are the children of survivors and thrivers, born from love that conquered hate. We carry songs from Louisiana waters and dreams that refuse to wait. We are Malcolm and Amara, black and beautiful and free. We are our mother's greatest victory, and everything we're meant to be. The small audience, Evangeline Sterling and his family, various aunts and cousins, erupted in applause. Lupita lifted her daughter off the stage, holding her close as Malcolm wrapped his arms around them both. "Mama, why are you crying?" Malcolm asked, worried. "Happy tears, my love," she said, kissing both their foreheads. The happiest tears in the world. As the sun set over Martha's vineyard, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Lupita stood surrounded by chosen family and blood family, by love that was earned and love that was given freely. The Sambergs were gone, not just from their lives, but from their relevance. They were footnotes in a story that had transcended them. Sterling raised a glass of champagne. "To Lupita Harris," he said, "who showed us all that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so beautiful they become irrelevant. To the twins," Evangeline added, "who will never know the weight of conditional love." "To the future," Lupita said, raising her own glass, "which belongs to those brave enough to claim it." As the celebrations continued into the evening, Lupita stepped away for a moment, looking out at the ocean. She thought of that Christmas morning 5 years ago, when she'd handed Alan those 2 envelopes that changed everything. She'd known then what she was doing. Not just seeking revenge, but liberation. The greatest victory wasn't that she'd won, it was that her children would never have to fight the same battle. They would grow up in a world where their worth was unquestioned, their brilliance expected, their blackness celebrated. They would never sit at a table where they were tolerated rather than treasured. In the distance, a plane passed overhead, perhaps carrying the Sambergs to their self-imposed exile. Lupita didn't watch it go. Instead, she turned back to her family, her real family, and rejoined the celebration of a life rebuilt from the ashes of what others had tried to burn down. The Christmas papers had been the beginning, but this was the ending she'd always deserved. Not with the Sambergs' tears or pleas or broken apologies, but with their complete irrelevance in the face of the beautiful life she'd built without them. The greatest revenge was a life well lived, and Lupita Harris had lived it magnificently.